The 2020 Williams FW43. What the f happened? And it's not just 2020, the FW42 from 2019 was just as bad, maybe even worse. Between 1980 and 1997, they won 9 of the possible 17 constructors titles and took home the Drivers' Championship 7 times. Sheesh. Williams were good. Since they first lined up on the grid for the Spanish Grand Prix way back in 1977, they've entered 790 races, have scored 3,587 points, had 313 podiums, 128 pole positions, 133 fastest laps, and have won 114 races. Now, I'm not here to give you a history lesson on the team, but in order to understand what went wrong for Williams in the first place, you first need to understand what led them down that path to success originally. A little bit of perspective never hurt anyone, right? Williams' tremendous success in the 1990s with drivers like Alan Prost, Nigel Mansell, Damon Hill was built on a mountain of Renault engines and technical genius from guys like Patrick Head and a little fella named Adrian Newey, the chief designer. Can't get away from this guy. Patrick Head was one of the guys who, along with Frank Williams, made the team, well, exist first of all, but also to make it what it would eventually become. And Adrian Newey is one of the most decorated, with some hiccups, designers in Formula One history. And when he left in 1998 to join McLaren because he felt like he didn't have enough say in the decisions being made at Williams, the team lost somebody who was instrumental to their success. And this, unfortunately, is something that they would never really be able to recover from fully. Early 2000s come along and the fight was mostly between McLaren and Ferrari at this point, because even though Williams had arguably the best engine on the grid at the time, the chassis just wasn't up to the standards that the team had set in the decade prior. It could and honestly has to be said that Williams' decline all started after Adrian left the team. 1998 and on, they just slowly slipped further and further behind. In 2004, one of the other key players in the team that we just spoke about, Patrick Head, he leaves the team. From 2004 to 2014, Williams' best result would be 4th in the Constructors' Championship in 2007, which was really only 5th in the championship because this is when McLaren got disqualified. I don't know, something happened in 2007 with McLaren and Ferrari and $100 million fine. I don't know nothing. 2009, 7th. 2010, 6th. 2011, 9th. 2012, 8th. 2013, 9th again. 2014, 3rd? Started the turbo hybrid era and they came 3rd in the Constructors' Championship, 100 points clear of Ferrari in 4th? Oh right, because they had the Mercedes power unit. It didn't matter how bad of an aero package you brought to the grid in the beginning of the turbo V6 era in 2014, because the only power unit that wasn't just horrible was the Mercedes. So they could just show up with a low downforce setup and generally do very good, but it just wasn't really real. In 2014, Williams did really well because of the OP engine, like we just discussed. They also did well in 15 and 16, but the second the other teams developed their power units to be able to compete with Mercedes even a little bit, Williams fell right to the back. They would do really well for a few years by having a good engine and really solid straight line speed with a low downforce setup, but they just couldn't develop aero to save their lives. They couldn't show up with a strong downforce package, which means that when other teams would close that power gap, it was over. Williams didn't have anything to fight with. Things like aero design, race operations, the very understanding of the cars that they make themselves, those have all been problems. People put a lot of blame on Claire Williams when she was in charge from 2013 to 2020.
What does that mean?
But this is mostly Frank's and, maybe even more significantly, Patrick Head's legacy. Not saying that Claire was perfect, because she wasn't, but the ship was already going down way before she ever got put in charge even in the first place. Even though she was never really in charge at all, because Frank would just refuse to relinquish control of the team because, again, he's stuck in those old ways. That was, again, part of the problem. No money because, well, no winning. No winning, no points, no sponsors, no prize money. Think Mercedes, but not at all like Mercedes. Well, in 2017, Williams' advantage that they had baked in from the Mercedes power unit being so good was at this point completely gone. Other teams had caught up, and Williams just couldn't take a powerful and reliable engine, throw it on a low drag setup, and by default be faster than most of the grid anymore who weren't using the Mercedes power unit. They actually had to build a car that was good on merit. All of the good personnel that had made the team so successful during their prosperous era had at this point left and never really got replaced, like Adrian and Patrick. These guys who were pivotal in the success of the team, nobody ever took their place when they left. Not really. And just like McLaren in 2003 with the MP418, they thought that the only answer to get back to the front end of the grid was a complete revolution and not an evolution of the car that they had been using for the past couple of years. And history tells us that that generally doesn't go very well for Formula One teams. Going into 2018, they decide to completely change the approach that they take to their cars fundamentally. They go from a historically low drag, low downforce setup to all the downforce all the time. And it didn't work. They'd spend the entire first half of 2018 trying to fix the FW41. It was unstable, slow, and wasn't behaving the way it did in simulations, and they just couldn't figure out why. By the middle to the end of the 2018 season, it was clear that it was a dead end for the team and the car wasn't going to get them anywhere in its current form. At this point, they spend the entire rest of the year not focusing on the car, but instead focusing on reworking and reforming their entire aero department. They wouldn't start working on the aero for the 2019 car until the time that every other team was already in their later stages of development. Everybody else was already almost done. Williams was just getting started going into 2019. On top of this, during this period, Williams was also having huge problems with their manufacturing. It was so bad that they didn't even make the grid in 2019 with the FW42 because the car couldn't be assembled in time, so they missed the first few testing sessions that they really needed. So they tried to fix the car, they tried to fix the factory, more chaos. Fix the personnel, chaos. Fix the car, chaos. Fix the manufacturing, chaos. Fix the aero department, chaos. The simulations, the leadership, who knows? Who knows? They didn't know. In 2019, they have a car that not only barely works at all, but that can barely even be assembled in the first place. They would finish the 2019 season with just one single point scored by Robert Kubica at the German Grand Prix. Yes, that one. When 2020 finally came around, a lot of the manufacturing had finally actually been sorted out. They actually had a car to show up to testing with at this time, but it still wouldn't go on to help them that much. The FW43 was driven by George Russell and Nicholas Latifi, their second and first year in Formula One respectively. It was designed by David Warner and Jonathan Carter, who were both in their first year with Williams after leaving Red Bull and Renault. Also, oof. Talk about a bad move. Well, I don't know that. I don't know their reasoning, obviously. People have reasons for things, all right? People have reasons for things. Williams as a team believed that the FW43 was supposed to be an evolution of the FW42, believing that the 42 was a strong foundation of which to build off of. It did have quite a few changes from its predecessor, though, mainly around the side pods, along with a myriad of other small aero changes and improvements to try and make the car more stable and more usable, more predictable. And it probably was better than the FW42 was from a year before. After all, testing didn't go nearly as bad as it did the year before in 2019. Russell was even quoted as saying that he felt that the car was much better than it was in 2019. But none of this stopped the FW43 from qualifying 17th and 20th at the opening round of the Austrian Grand Prix in 2020 in July. Pandemic, COVID, you guys remember COVID? There were a couple of opportunities throughout the season where points looked like they might be possible, but it was just never in the cards for the team. The car was too sensitive when it was in the wake of a car in front, which was always because it was always stuck behind somebody, and also it was sensitive when nobody was in front of it. It was sensitive all the time. It was twitchy, unstable, unpredictable, just like the FW42 was from the year before, maybe slightly better, but still bad. 2020 would be the only year in Williams history where they would go on to not score a single point, which is why this video is about the FW43 and not the FW42, which was arguably a worse car in 2019, but Williams had one scoreless season since 1977, and that was 2020. A real showing of just how far the team has fallen since their opus in the 80s and the 90s. This ain't your dad's, Williams. I wish there was that one blaring issue that made the car as bad as it was, when really Williams had been on a slow decline for decades, getting worse and worse. Williams had a virus that infected every part of the organization from the bottom up. Now come 2021, the team unveils the FW43B, obviously an updated version of the car from 2020, which was also an updated version of the car from 2019 like we've discussed, and the year would go a lot better for them. In 2021, they would go on to score a total of 23 points, infinity better than 0 points from 2020. As bad as the platform was at its core, they weren't completely wrong when they said that the FW42 wasn't a terrible platform to be able to build a car off of. It did have potential, but however much that was, Williams as an organization and as a team were just never able to squeeze anything out of it. They were just too busy trying to keep their heads out of the water to ever be able to focus on being strong when it counted.